Hello and welcome to Business Insider with Mario Toneguzzi on yyccalgarybusiness.ca. Joining me today is Karen Spencer, who is project coordinator of the Simpson Center at the School of Public Policy at the University of Calgary. Thanks for joining us today, Karen.
Thank you very much, Mario.
Well, Karen, you're the author of a report that the school has published this past week. And the title is, Did COVID Support for Beef and Cattle Producers Hit the Mark? Did it? I guess that's the first question. Did it?
That's a great question. I guess in summary, we'd say it somewhat hit part of the mark, but we saw definite gaps in the aid given by the government.
Okay, let me just backtrack a little bit, and maybe can you explain, Karen, like what kind of supports that the government gave to that industry?
Sure. Actually, I'll kind of maybe go back a little more, Mario, to what we were looking at just for a bit of detail.
Sure.
We noticed, like a lot of people, there were disruptions. There were empty shelves in grocery stores. There were shutdowns in processing facilities that we read about. And that resulted in this major backlog of cattle for processing. But things we also saw were higher retail beef prices, and they were like 18 or 20% higher than the previous year in the months of June and July, around there.
Yeah.
And then we also didn't see it so much, but we were aware of it because we're talking to stakeholders in this area. Lower cattle prices for feedlot cattle being sold to the processors and for cow-calf operations. So we decided to tackle this and look at numbers, because the other thing we all saw and maybe read about in the news was the federal and provincial government announced a support program called the set-aside program to help the cattle producers in some way. And that set-aside program, essentially the shutdown and backlog at the processing plants created a big number of cattle that could not get through, and they handled just major numbers. So overall, about 130,000 cattle at its peak were hanging around waiting to go through the processing, and compared to the previous year. And so the set-aside program is designed to pay feedlot producers a little bit of extra money to make up for the costs for feed and for veterinary costs and other operating costs by holding on to these cattle for an extra couple of months.
Yeah. Okay. So, where are we at right now for that industry?
So that's a great question. The backlog actually was chipped away at late in the year. So we were down to about 95,000 head, still below the previous year's number. So if we compare to 2019, we hadn't fully caught up. By the end of January, I think we're down to about 60,000. But then in February, we kind of swung the other way. And I think we're back up a little. So just compared to year over year, we are not quite caught up. I'd say there's still some cattle out there. And what's interesting is the government decided to end the set-aside program in Alberta by the end of January or so, which, if you're setting a cattle aside for 60 days, which is the period, about 63 days that they do it for, would end payments by the end of March, which is kind of the fiscal year. So I think it will potentially create another bump or another high number of cattle being sent to processing, which could again depress prices. Over the winter, the set-aside program was actually fairly effective at bolstering prices a little bit and giving stability to the market for feedlots and for the beef supply chain in general. And if they remove it quickly here, it'll create like a big slug of product again at the front end of the plant. So one of the recommendations we would have is potentially extending that program for at least another 3 to 6 months. It worked, it softened and supported the markets a bit and gave them some stability. So we definitely would suggest if they could even do that a little longer. The price for the feedlots is supported a little. The support doesn't go to the cow-calf operators, but if the feedlots get a little better price, the cow-calf operators will hopefully get a little better price too.
Okay, then. And what does this all mean right now for consumers?
Well, unfortunately, last year we did see a pretty steady increase in prices over the summer for beef. And then I know they got closer to normal in the fall, but still comparatively speaking, they were a little bit higher than the previous year. And
Yeah.
so if we see more of these big interruptions in the beef supply chain, we could see more swings like that. And again, they were swings that were pretty high, 18 to 20% on some products. So the set aside program itself was a relatively small dollar amount compared to the dollars that beef producers were out
Yeah.
for the depressed prices on their cattle, but it had a solid effect on stabilizing pricing. And of course, the real winners of this, if the producers and the us, the consumers, are out, it's the wholesalers and retailers and the middlemen, the processors, that have gained on their margin hugely over the last year. And so if we want to have stability in the system, something like this set aside program, maybe a little longer, could help, in addition to some other measures.
Okay, then. What do you think the impact, the longer COVID and the whole situation with COVID lasts? What's the impact on the overall beef industry?
Yeah, in general, I think the initial steps that we saw processors taking were to protect those folks working in those close quarters in the big processing facilities. And that's a really important thing. I think in the longer term, as we've seen, it's a year later and we're still seeing some outbreaks in some other meat processing plants. So addressing that, certainly they've done some really good measures and put some money into it from an operations point of view. But I'd say one of the key things they could do for helping the longer term is to make those essential food workers higher up on the list for getting vaccinations, because clearly we're still dealing with potential outbreaks within those facilities.
Yeah, exactly. All right, super then. Well, thanks very much for joining us today, Karen.
I'm very glad to be here. Thanks very much, Mario.
Okay, great. That was Karen Spencer, who is project coordinator of the Simpson Center at the School of Public Policy at the University of Calgary. This has been Business Insider with Mario Toneguzzi on yyccalgarybusiness.ca. Thanks for joining us today.